Welcome to ALN Thursday at 3. My name is Mike Bordnaro. I'm the Executive Director of the Asset Leadership Network, and we're doing a little different take on ALN Thursday at 3 today. We are revisiting the draft Asset Management Executive Order that was initiated by the ALN in 2013, and Jack Dempsey brushed up in 2014. And in order to understand the best way to socialize this, we're having a open discussion as opposed to just a one-on-one talk. And before we get started with the discussion, and participants can join in if they want to, write in the chat that you want to become a panelist, we'll make you a panelist. Or if you just want to put questions in the chat or the question area, go right ahead. But first, we'd like to thank our patron members and our organizational members. We very much appreciate the support of these organizations, and they provide incredible emotional, physical, all types of support. So very grateful for them. So I had everyone turn off their cameras, but why don't we go to the Hollywood Squares. Jim Dieter, ALN CEO, is known. Steve Holland is with LMI. Dave Brewer is with Jacobs. And we had Alex Barenblit. If you want to turn on your camera, Alex, go right ahead.
I'm attempting to do that. I'm having technical difficulties, and it was working a few moments ago.
Okay. So it was Jim who thought that it was good time to dust off the executive order and run it up the flagpole again. And I was in full support of that. It's actually an excellent document. It is a 2-page document that concisely and precisely lays out why the President of the United States would want to have an executive order on asset management. It's something that can be copied by other organizations, other countries, a company. It is very clear policy document. However, a lot in the asset management landscape has changed since we first wrote it. So we wanted to look at it and get ideas of what people thought might improve. And then what I think is equally important, or if not the most important, how to socialize it, how to get the attention it deserves. And Jim, why don't you start off by giving a little bit of background and status report?
Yeah, sure. When we started this, we had this effort in 2013. We called a big meeting, and we had 20-some people showed up at a big conference room that Marlene Melamachi provided. And Steve Holland was one of those people. I remember him being there. I remember it well. And we did a lot of good work and captured a lot of ideas. Had several drafts. And then, as Mike said, Jack Dempsey added his experience and foresight to it. And I think really did a good job of, as Mike said, condensing it to a short document, getting us from the long letter to the short letter, which is really good. And, I think now's a good time to bring this up again, as with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We can talk about some of the implications of that for the document, but that's a brief background. Steve, do you have other memories from the beginning that you want to share?
I think it was I viewed it as a great opportunity for asset property management professionals to kind of make their mark in really getting something that we are so passionate about in front of the president, and really looking at how do we collectively become or further our efforts in being good stewards of taxpayers' dollars through the management of government property. And, thinking about, there's a lot of room for improvement, both on the federal agency side, the contract side, all sectors of business, because there are so many that use property in all the various forms. So that kind of stems back to my involvement in the ISO 55000 world. And, here we are incorporating, some of that into the executive order as well. So I think it's all goodness, and there's, a lot of room for improvement, as I previously mentioned. And, I think we have a lot of great people that can help, refine, if necessary, the document, but also maybe through connections, helping with the socialization piece as well. So those are, kind of things that I think about, Jim, when we're talking about an executive order.
Excellent. So then, David, welcome to the Asset Leadership Network. Why don't we get your perspective on why you thought this was important, and then we'll go to Alex, who was at the first meeting on Tuesday, and we can talk a little bit about that.
Certainly. Well, thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel. My background is both on the public side and the private sector side. I spent 28 years in the Air Force dealing with items that do come down, whether it be from higher headquarters or from Congress, or in this case, an executive order from the president that we're trying to achieve here to do good things. And they come in, executive orders, my experience have been, they come in a variety of forms from a variety of perspectives. And some of them are exactly what, as an owner, user, and steward at the lowest level are very interested in and makes good sense. And sometimes they don't necessarily make sense at the lowest level, but they certainly make sense as you get higher up the channels. And so our challenge is to resonate with the agencies, as Steve said, to be good stewards of the assets that they have to take care of on a daily basis, but also as to where it fits into giving them help in achieving those goals too, because the day-to-day of taking care of assets, as we all know, is expected. But in the funding for it is limited in every way that you can imagine. But unless the playing field is level, or at least a way to demonstrate that the investments that you make as an owner, be it an agency or an installation, you can demonstrate that this investment made in these systems gives this type of outcome. That's where it gets to be difficult. So trying to get everybody on the same page with an executive order, I think, is a great idea, especially in light of the Infrastructure Investment Act, because they really are putting a lot of money out. As taxpayers, we're going to see a lot of money be invested, and those need to be smart investments. And so this is an opportunity I see, is to bring it forward.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll come back to your experience with executive orders. That was one of the great things about having Mike Imony in our first meeting, and he might join us later, but a direct experience of what they meant. So Alex, I know you're not able to have your camera work, but can you provide some comments on why you think the executive order is important, and maybe some of the key takeaways from the meeting we started things off with on Tuesday?
Certainly. I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yeah.
Sorry you can't see me. It worked a few moments ago, but regardless, it was a very good meeting the other day. Mike Imony really provided some very good perspective specific to, among other things, the importance of getting OMB on board. That was a big part of the discussion, where I think this executive order direction has importance. We all recognize, all of us that manage assets of all types, recognize that often the management of assets is something that's taken for granted until something bad happens. And when something bad happens, then people get all kinds of excited. People need to understand, including the president needs to understand the importance of these assets. As David just pointed out, the investment in infrastructure is ginormous, and it's extremely important. And the investments have to be smart, and the importance of them is more than just public relations value. Its importance across the board, and having assets relate to each other is extremely important. And, you know, one of the things that Steve likes to say a lot, and we all do, is setting the right tone at the top. And can you get more tone at the top than the executive office of the president?
Not really.
Excellent. And I think that that sums it up pretty well, Steve. Jim, do you want to add anything?
Well, there's lots of ways we can go. The one topic I was going to, that I think is top of mind to me, I always at least try to see things top down. And the first notable thing about the executive order, if you're not aware of it, you can, you know, it's posted on the ALN website,
yeah.
The draft executive order. But the existing draft executive order talks about federal assets. So that's, as Steve was mentioning, you know, that's assets of federal agencies, it's assets in the hands of government contractors, you know, of all sorts. But when we started to write the National Asset Leadership Strategy, we came to the same, dealing with the same question. And that's why we use the term National Asset Leadership Strategy instead of Federal Asset Leadership Strategy, because we wanted it to apply to the nation's assets. We clearly see that that's a reality in terms of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Most of those assets, you know, the assets involved are going to be built, managed, you know, owned by state municipal governments. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be, you know, owned by the federal government. So, you know, do we in fact want to expand the scope of this executive order? Or a notable person I talked to this morning about it, you know, thought that it would be better to have two parallel and joint executive orders, you know, one about federal assets and one about, you know, assets, you know, funded by the U.S. government. Welcome, Mike Imany.
Sorry I was late. I got detained doing chores.
You got to answer to the boss. My father is a retired colonel, but I call my mother the general. So totally understand. So we were just going through introductions, and then you heard Jim say that he thinks the executive order, draft executive order, should include all assets instead of just federally owned assets. And if you wanted to make an opening statement or.
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody. And I'm Mike Imany, and I work primarily on the real property side of asset management, and have spent a good fair share of my time in the Department of Defense, where we had a very significant set of assets, both personal and real property. I'll pick up on Jim's comment for one moment, and that is, it seems to me we need to get an expert to ask us a question if the president has the authority in an executive order to mandate to other than federal assets. Now, it could be that the legal opinion would come back as long as federal resources, federal dollars were spent on sustaining, renewing, maintaining those state and local assets, then maybe. But I will argue there are assets beyond the federal, and there's assets beyond the state and local. There's assets within the private sector. And I actually think that, you know, the whole idea of ISO 5000 is it's a unifying process for the articulation and management and the evaluation of value and determination of risks associated with assets or their loss of assets. So I make only a recommendation that I think we need an expert to opinion on if the president has authority to write an executive order that's beyond the federal sector. Maybe they do. I just wouldn't have that experience. Department of Transportation expert would have a better knowledge of that than me.
Okay, we'll reach out to our contacts there. They actually want to be involved in a summit again. They were not ready to join our first summit on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act because they were busy writing their regulations. They did not want to talk about them beforehand. So we'll reach out to them. And also we do have Jack Kelly. Jack, if you would like to become a panelist and make any type of comments, just let me know in the chat and I'll make you a panelist. So that gets us to the specifics of this. And the initial draft executive order was an idealistic, not idealistic, you know, ideal, let's get this in front. It was a long reach. And I think it still is a long reach. And I don't think that the actual implementation of an executive order is a measure of the success of this initiative. I think just going to OMB, going to our friends at the federal agencies who are already implementing asset management and specifically ISO 55000 asset management principles, getting letters from them in support of the initiative will at least move the ball forward, whether or not an executive order is signed or not. Dave, what do you think about that?
I agree that bringing in other shared inputs to them to think about, you know, hey, this is going to make a big impact, is important. It's just not a single voice. And the shared perspective is we do have failing infrastructure. We've made lots of investments as Mike and I. Good to see you again, Mike. My last conversation, I think, was on a subway several years ago. Yep. While you're still in the Pentagon. But, you know, billions of dollars are invested every year in whether it's a focused effort like the infrastructure investment or just the sustainment dollars that are put out every year. But knowing that those are going to be recorded and updated in the assets, the physical assets, says that, yes, we've done these, this accountability of this maintenance or this recapitalization is clearly an outcome that would be here. But absent a unified approach to it, it is whatever that agency is doing, and the documents that get put together and brought forward to Congress, they are as different as you can imagine, because everybody's doing it the way that they think is the right way to do it versus a unified approach. And so I think the executive order approach, there's goodness in it, but it can't just be a single voice. I think that what you're saying of joining in with other inputs would be useful.
So we've had Jack Kelly join us. Jack is a ALN Board of Directors member, ALN Senior Fellow, and importantly in this conversation, has 36 years under his belt at the Office of Management and Budget. He's on mute now, but if he'd be willing to talk about what he understands the authority the president might have for an executive order, or just in general about the idea of this executive order.
So I've helped actually write executive orders, and I think I have a reasonable sense of what the president can and can't do. Quite frankly, so the president basically, his authority extends to providing direction to the executive branch. And so the president can direct agencies to take actions which impact their assets. He can direct agencies to take actions that affect grantees, loan recipients, anybody that gets federal money. He can take actions to affect regulations that impact how contractors manage federal assets. I mean, but it has to be through tools that federal agencies have. The president has no authority whatsoever to directly impact state and local government actions to the extent that it's outside of federal grants. He has no authority to direct private sector organizations outside of the regulatory authority that agencies might have over private sector organizations. So those are kind of the boundaries that you have to deal with. But nonetheless, that gives the president a whole lot of influence over how things are done across a very broad, sectors in the economy. And I totally agree with y'all on a number of issues. Socializing this is really important. Getting a lot of input is important. Putting this in the context of the infrastructure, act, because there's so much money floating around out there now that if there's ever going to be an important time to manage that money well, it's now. And so I think this is a very timely conversation. I'm thrilled that everybody's having it.
Excellent. So, Mike Imony, does that answer your question? Jack is not a lawyer, but he does play one on TV sometimes. So.
No, that was getting to that point. There is a boundary and a limit, and by calling it a national executive order as opposed to a federal agency executive order, I think is a reasonable approach, but understand where those limits are.
Excellent.
Let's put it this way: write it as broadly as we can, and then let the folks that have to go through the legal opinions sharpen it and focus it if it has to be, but don't limit it when you find out that it could have been broader.
So Jim started our meeting on Tuesday with a very important concept. He went to Wikipedia and looked up executive order and what it was and what it does. And basically what we're suggesting is to use the executive order as a framework for guiding agencies to understand a best practice approach is a nonpartisan use of executive order that could be very welcomed if we socialize this properly. And I think the way to do that is, as I mentioned, go to our friends at agencies that are already doing this and get testimonials that say that this is a good way to do it. And if you write an executive order that says to do it this way, we'll do it because we already are. I think that would be powerful. We are fortunate to have many of the agencies and the Department of Defense who are very knowledgeable about ISO 55000. And this would help spread it out to the other agencies and then, of course, bring attention to it to non-government entities, local governments, and state government also. Jack, I see your hand up, and I have a lot of questions for you too, but I don't want to just be picking on you, but please go ahead.
So just listening to y'all, what I realize is that even though an executive order can only impact federal agency actions, I think it's a time to think outside the box as to what some of those federal agency actions might be. And so, for example, one of the approaches that on one of the reform efforts that I was involved in, one of the things that we did was we created an award program, and it had to do with aircraft. And so we created an award program that agencies could compete for in order to get this particular award. And so it would be conceivable for some federal agency, it could be done through maybe NIST or through whatever agency is willing to do it, to create like an asset management award of excellence that could be given to private sector organizations that met certain qualifications. So there may be some things that we can do to influence or incentivize private sector behavior that don't have anything to do with regulations, but it's just kind of a different approach. So I think this is a great time to think about things like that and I agree with Mike Imeny's point. Let's put the broadest possible net out there and then have people push back and say, well, you've overstepped here, but we like all this other stuff.
So another aspect of this that has come up in conversations, including from Mike Imeny, I believe, is that there's already a bunch of regulation out there, like the budget. What is the name of the Budget Act, et cetera. Do we try to write it to be more general and just reference those, or do we need to incorporate them somehow? How do we approach that question? Okay.
I'm not sure we need to, this is just my 2 cents. I'm not sure we need to be general and just incorporate by reference. I think whatever we write, building on the draft that was done back in 2013, needs to do what the initial draft does, which is describe what this is and why it's important. And, why does it matter?
So we need kind of a package. And yeah. I like what Jack Kelly was saying, that this by itself is a powerful, worthwhile activity. But when we combine it with a campaign that includes recognition of existing excellence, it makes it even more powerful. So I think that's a very good contribution.
One question I have that we brought up the other day, and I'd like maybe Jack's thoughts on this, Mike shared some, is the relationship or I guess the thrust with OMB. What do we think we can do there?
But I would like Jack to say what has been done. I know there's tons of changes, but we do have some inroads at OMB, and then how can we build on that?
I'll tell you, OMB is a tough nut to crack in the best of times. I can tell you some things. I mean, first of all, it's a hurdle we have to go through, no question about it. I think Jack Dempsey has created some good relationships between some of the people in OMB who would be important to talk to. But my take, quite frankly, I think you're going to have a lot of pushback from the career people. That's just the way they are. That's the way they're wired. But coming in through the political folks, I think has the greatest chance of success. I'd like to be proven wrong, but I'm willing to put a little money on it. So but I can tell you a couple of things real quick. One of the things that I would recommend doing in this, and I just want to get these out there while they're still in my mind, is one of the things that we know now that I'm not sure we knew back when this was originally drafted, is that asset management is not a new concept in the federal government. It's been around. I mean, it's been around for a while in the transportation programs. It's been around to a lesser extent in the water programs. And so it's a term that it's no longer new. So that's point one. the other thing, and I think in the preamble, in the kind of the introductory language of the executive order, that ought to be mentioned. In addition, GAO has done this amazing report that talked about asset management, and that needs to be mentioned in some way. So my overall point is that make it clear that this executive order is not breaking new ground. It's building on ground that's already been prepared and demonstrated benefits. And we also know of a number of federal agencies that have embraced asset management in whatever way they're able to within the authorities that they have. So that's a point that I think would be a powerful point for this executive order. Another suggestion, and I don't think anybody's going to like this, is I really don't think you should mention ISO 55000 specifically.
Wow.
The reason is that asset management, I mean, OMB, I can guarantee you, OMB has a knee-jerk reaction to specific standards, and their reaction, and I can almost predict the words. It would be, we support asset, if we can get them to say this, we support asset management, but we don't want to have to tie asset management to any specific standard because standards might change and something new might come along. That is standard OMB response. And if we get a different response, I'll take you to lunch. So so those two those, and then
Everybody.
Well, no, I'll pick who I take. But my point is, those are just some general suggestions that I just want to throw out there.
Very funnily made too, Jack. Thank you. Dave Brewer has his.
Yeah. On the topic of Jack, your point about a lot of this has been done or awareness of it. I did a little bit of a deep dive, an amateur deep data dive this morning over executive orders, and since 1994, over 1,000 executive orders have been issued, and they're of a wide variety. I think Jack pointed out they different interests, and as I mentioned as well. When I put in things like investment or sustainment or infrastructure or environment or transportation, put those keywords in, there's about 20 executive orders since 94 that are, work around that topic. And so the one that jumps off the page at me is the original federal real property asset management back in 2004. And it's been modified a number of times, but that introduced the discussion on a higher plane, and what I'd mentioned earlier about having a common a unifying approach to what you identify as an asset or how you manage it is an important step. But some of the titles of these, and I'll just read a couple more, efficient federal operations, even though that's not necessarily a popular term coming from the administration, but it did impact the use of investment dollars. Transportation management, looking for strengthening transportation management, and last one was promoting energy infrastructure and economic growth. All of what we were talking about with ISO 55000 all do all those things, but putting a standard against it I agree, that might be a lightning rod that would not have the outcome they want to be. And then my final comment and thought is just my reaction over executive orders in general or downward directed mandates. You call them whatever you want to call them. Whatever the system is, whatever the process that we bring forward, it should be one that works for the agency and not the agency working for that standard. None of us like that. Any of the efficiencies that our organizations bring in. So this is better, new and improved. What's changed that made it new and improved? Well, it's good, maybe good for you that developed it, but it's not necessarily good for our process. And so it needs to work for the asset managers and be one that they can show the accountability of the investment that they're putting into what they're stewards of, and appeal to that perspective, not be another box that needs to be checked, because that's no fun.
Well, a couple things related to that. First of all, I think that we can have that through our friends at agencies who are using it and would be able to say that this is good for you. You should do it, whether there's an executive order or not. And we've got that. And you go to the head of the class because Mike Imany on Tuesday said, we should do a deep dive into executive orders and see what's already been done out there. So Mike, did that address some of the things that you were thinking about when you mentioned that Tuesday?
Sure. And obviously what I think you'll see is that there's a fairly robust body of executive orders for the federal real property side of the house, but there's less of one that speaks to non-real property, that's to say personal property.
So Steve Holland, you mentioned Executive Order 14057. How do you see that as relating? What is it, first of all?
Well, it's actually catalyzing clean energy industries and jobs through federal sustainability. And this is talking about electrifying the motor vehicle fleet. The president has mandated that all agency zero emission vehicle acquisitions for light duty vehicles need to be 100% by FY 2027. And then medium duty and heavy duty, 100% zero emission vehicle acquisitions by FY 2035. And I know there's a lot of federal agencies that are putting together zero emission vehicle strategies that are being submitted. I know ours is being submitted to OMB. I believe it goes to OMB and the White House Council on Environmental Quality.
You say ours, which agency are you representing?
Well, it's one of the no-named agencies.
One of the security agencies. Okay.
So, and it's a big deal, so I think, that's one of the most recent. I think there's even one that is kind of coupled with that. And I don't know all the details of it yet, but it's 14008. I just learned that today, so I'm going to be doing some research on that in the morning. But I know that Eric Brown and the DHS team have a program office set up to respond to OMB and the White House Council on their strategy, because they actually have shared it with several agencies, including some in the national security arena.
Eric Brown is asset
Brown
management at Department of Homeland Security and is an ALN senior fellow.
Exactly. He's and there's some folks within his group that are leading a program management office for electrifying the fleet within DHS, and they're really one of the key leaders out front of this executive order. So we've collaborated with them and are getting smarter by the minute, and so that we can develop our strategy as well.
Well, definitely thank you for that. I will reach out to him. We need to get him involved in this, because if there's ways that we can daisy chain some executive orders or use language that say this does not replace existing executive orders for this, that, or the other, it is a way of helping achieve the goals of other executive orders. We might want to.
I have a question.
You could say what we're really trying to do is generalize a process to achieve the goals of those various executive orders.
I have a question.
Write that down. Write that down, Jim. I've got too many things going on. Generalize the process for achieving the other executive orders. Okay, we're recording. We'll just get it off the transcript. And I should point out that John Shelness has been making some pretty good points in the chat. The green book, the yellow book, FAR, there's a lot that is there already, and it's about enforcement, which brings us to another part of this. The United States government is not just one entity, it's got 3 branches. And how much should we socialize with the legislative branch about the executive order and say something like, you don't want the president to beat you, put it in the legislation. I don't know if that would work, but some way to show a unified effort on this very important issue, because it seems crazy, but asset management is an actual way to help thwart a lot of the world of problems that are coming at us. People who have used ISO 55000 report achieving things they didn't even think were possible.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, Mike, I have a thought on the legislative.
Steve, thank you for that.
I have a thought on the legislative part.
Alex, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I take it as a compliment. Thank you. May want to perhaps the most effective way of making progress with the legislative branch is reaching out to the chief administrative officer for the House of Representatives and his counterpart at the Senate. It just so happens that I supported them as a consultant for a couple of years, and that individual is a very influential person with respect to asset management for the legislative branch.
So if they actually see it working for them,
yeah,
then they might understand to write it into legislation also.
Correct.
Yeah, I was going to say that earlier, in that, or comments in that direction, that, the heart of this is the content that we're bringing forward, and whether it's cast as legislative language or executive order language is simply the framing. So we didn't cast it as legislative language before, but that would probably be a good idea if we're going to take it to legislative people.
So the legislative language in MAP 21, I think, is really good. It's simple and it's proven. And actually, the GAO did a study on that, and I still have to look that up. But it just says agency or any entity receiving money from MAP 21 will submit an asset management plan in order to receive the money. And we set aside $1 million to train any entity that feels they can benefit from training on how to put together an asset management plan. Real simple.
Mike, I suggest John and Cecilia have been making a lot of comments. Why don't we see if they'd like to join us, make a comment, and then maybe do a final go around, something like that?
That sounds good. Cecilia, would you like to be made a panelist? And John Shelness, would you like to be made a panelist? You can, if you're having bad hair days, we're not going to force you. But if you write in the chat, I'll go ahead and do that. Don't want to make you do anything. So while they're doing that, why don't we do a final go around? And why don't we say it this way? What are you willing to do to help us take the next step? Nothing major, just, what do you think would be a good thing that you can do? And Dave Brewer, since you're new to the game, we'll put you on the spot first. We'll see if we can get you to commit to the most.
I'll continue the deep dive on the data. This is an area that I'm aware of, and we can get it narrowed down. But yes, the commonality between different existing executive orders. I think that would be a good point to move on.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you involved in more programs in the future.
Thank you.
John Shellness. I was not able to make you a panelist, but I was able to allow you to talk.
Oh, well, can you
We
hear me?
Yes,
can you hear me?
Yes,
okay?
we can hear you. Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah. So, you know, I put my thoughts in the chat. I always, every time I attend these meetings, it really gets, you know, the old gears spinning. And even though I'm, you know, I always say I'm an outsider, I'm not kind of part of the club. It's still a topic that is of great interest to me. And I think it's a very worthy cause, what all of you are doing.
Thank you, John. And you are part of the club. Your company is an ALN organizational member, so you can't get away with that. And thank you for your many contributions, and congratulations on your recent radio program interview. So, and your presentation out in California. So you're bringing the ALN word around with you as you go. We appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Cecilia, thank you for joining us. You're on mute, but there you go.
Sorry about that. Yeah, now I'm live. Very interesting. I'm very excited from what I've heard today. And I think I want to hit on Jack Kelly's comment of creating incentives. And Mike, you also mentioned that. We have to invite people to the table, and oftentimes the dictates don't make them feel welcome. But the telling of the stories of all the various players that we know that are associated with ALN will be really critical in making a difference. And the international stories as well, because we really know a lot about what is being created. Now, some of it is being dictated overseas, but then the benefits that people are achieving, that companies are achieving, where they can tell their story that we put this in place. Yes, it was required, but in putting it in place, we're seeing return on that investment of time and energy, and in the way of impact. And the other thought that came to me as we talked is I'd love to see us do something on the legislative side, because the more we discuss this with legislators, they go back to their home bases. And even if it doesn't become legislation that's federal legislation, they may well be able to impact locally at the state level and make a difference there. And then I have a question for this esteemed panel, because our discussion was so focused on the tangible assets. I'd like to hear you guys talk a bit about what you think the work of ISO 55000 in asset management and using the executive order for infrastructure management investment will be able to help us with the concept of equity and increasing equity. Any thoughts on that from you guys in terms of reaching out to communities that have been underserved, whether it's the rural, the urban, those kind of things? Any thoughts about what ways that could be utilized there?
Before that, I'd like to point out that your comment about international application and success with the asset management is very important. We had someone from Peru on the call today. So,
ay, qué bien. Yeah. Bienvenido. Espero que usted tratará de venir cuando tenemos ALN español. Tenemos el red de ALN en español y le invito, yo no puedo ver quién está, pero le invito cuando tenemos ese grupito que tenemos también un ALN español, que es como ese ALN los jueves, lo tenemos, yo no sé cuándo, en un mes o algo. Así que nótalo.
Yes, everyone is invited to join ALN Español and participate. So that's very good. In terms of calling out the requirement to involve all relevant stakeholders, I think that would be very important part of the campaign. And since President Biden has made equity a huge part of his administration, that would resonate very well. So it would do us well to call that out, is my opinion.
I would agree, Mike. But one of the things we need to do is make sure we tie the two together, because they're different executive orders and people go in silos. And there are a couple, we need to think about that deep dive that Dave was talking about, mapping which ones work together and should have cross fertilization.
One of the features of the existing draft is that it features the 4 principles, we called them fundamentals at that time, from ISO 55000. So one of the possibilities is to include the additional 3 principles that are under discussion in the revision: adaptability, sustainability, and integration. And then I'm poking people that we need to add the 8th, which is equity. And those could easily be, whether or not they're in 55,000, they could be referenced in our standard as considerations to be addressed in strategic asset management plans.
Steve Holland, did you want to make any comments to close out?
I think, you know, there's a lot of things that play into this, and with the great folks we have here today, I think, you know, there's, from each of our backgrounds, we can really, you know, get folks excited about, you know, participating in a way that, you know, can ultimately hit the mark, to where if we say, you know, we want to go through the legislative branch, so to speak, and also to tee it up. And I think, you know, that's something that's very worthwhile.
Great, thank you. Mike Imany?
Well, thanks for including me this afternoon. It's important that at least on the real property side, that the larger real property executive branch agencies are bought into this. And so that's going to take some special effort to get to defense and energy and Veterans Affairs and Department of Energy and the like. Because if you get to those 5 top agencies, you've got basically 95% of the infrastructure.
Yeah, including the GSA.
If they're vested, then, you know, they'll be easier in the process of coordination with OMB. Jack Kelly was spot on. You know, most of the departments and agencies will say, I get it, but don't tie me to a specific thing. I get the concept, I get the principles.
Yeah.
This is good management. I buy that. Just don't tie it to a standard.
Excellent. Jim came up with the phrase, a structured approach to asset management, which is great, because I defy anybody to come up with a better structured approach to asset management than ISO 55000. Well, we don't have to put it in there. So Jack Kelly, you want to make a closing comment?
I guess just that I think it's really a timely conversation. I think it's great to reach out. I think an executive order, a properly drafted executive order, could do a lot to move the ball forward. And so I support what we're trying to do, and I'm happy to be, you know, to help provide whatever assistance I can be.
Thank you.
So Mike,
Jack, go ahead.
Mike and Steve, I got a question. Are there any, are you looking for contacts to reach out to that we can have a conversation with? Because when you mentioned DOD, I can think of Mike McAndrew, who's the senior executive over the construction group. He's within OSD acquisition and sustainment, but he's responsible for construction. And he might be a good person.
Funny you mentioned him, because that was the precise person that Mike Imany mentioned on Tuesday. So,
and I have his contact information at the office.
excellent.
I think more importantly about Mike McAndrew is he's the defense senior official that is appointed to work with the Federal Real Property Council.
Oh, yeah.
So I effectively took my job in that aspect of that activity.
One of the things I think.
Well, I think we should deputize everybody to gather information rather than waiting for central. We're willing to provide as much central control as people need. But Steve, if you and or Mike have an angle to do that, you know as much as any of us, for sure. No reason to wait. If we can provide support, or you want another person, Mike or I or others on the call would probably be willing to participate. But a lot of times one-on-one or, two-on-one conversations are the best way to get some real feedback on people's thoughts on it.
If anyone can reach out to the folks on the infrastructure coordinating group, that we had that lady who was the deputy to Mitch Landrieu and get Mitch. I mean, that group would be an amazing partner for what we're trying to do if we could just make contact with them at a significant level.
Jack, I'm sorry, what was the name of that infrastructure? What?
You'd have to look. I don't know the official name, but it's like it's the group within the White House that is in charge of coordinating the spending of the infrastructure money, and it's and I think Mitch Landrieu is the head of it, and there's a somebody from the White House that's his deputy that was on one of our ALN at 3s, Thursday at 3s.
I'll get you that.
There was Mitch Landrieu was one of the featured speakers at a Results for America virtual conference yesterday afternoon. So you can get his information and perhaps even video of what he had to say. I was able to watch a little bit, but not all of it. Results for America is good. We haven't heard from Alex.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you. Like everyone else said, thank you for including me in this conversation. There's a lot of great potential out of this effort. And I think the comments that were made earlier about incentives as opposed to mandates was really, really positive and helpful. A lot of contacts we can make in a lot of different directions.
And Jim, we'll let you have the last word as I share my screen and thank our sponsors, our members. So,
I like the idea that, as transportation did, is providing some funding for training. I think whatever's invested in this from a federal perspective is going to pay enormous dividends going forward. Enormous. So also want to thank everybody for joining and listening and contributing today, and especially you, Mike.
Oh, you're welcome. This is why I'm on board. And thanks to our organizational members and our patron members, and to our audience members who actually became our panelists also, and to our audience members who did not become panelists. Thank you. We'll let everyone know when we have another meeting. We've got some pretty good ideas about direction. We'll put together something and let people start sharing it.
I would suggest that we will set up, or I don't want to push anything else on Mike. Set up, that's a little joke there. Anyhow, it's an apple on a tree for Mike. Perhaps an every other week meeting, and where we can touch base and see what people have been able to turn up and to keep moving it forward.
I'll send an email out. We had a good response for Tuesday at noon. and we'll try that second Tuesday in May.
Except that doesn't work for Mike Hyman.
All right. Mike Imony, what days are good for you?
Anything other than Tuesday at noon.
All right. Makes it easy.
There's your answer.
All right. Thank you, everybody. This is another exciting initiative from the Asset Leadership Network. Love it. Bye for now.